In my home Dungeons & Dragons game, I'm running a Kobold Press module called Courts of the Shadow Fae. It takes the players from levels 7 to 11 as they earn status within the court in hopes of gaining an audience with the Queen of Night and Magic. It's highly political, and my players have spent over 2 years in real time meeting the 126 NPCs the module provides, and building relationships with them as they raise their renown. That kind of dedicated work deserves something special as a reward. It deserves a party. And in this context, that party has to be a courtly masquerade. To be honest, I was surprised a masquerade isn't already included in the module. There's an excellent banquet where the menu is the event sequence, and it's really well done. But a courtly campaign with no masquerade seems outrageous to me, so I set out to see how other people had done it. And a lot of what I found focused on the player characters having a singular goal, usually gain entry and identify one specific person. Nowhere did I find advice for running a masquerade with the goal of identifying all the guests. That takes a different kind of setup and a different kind of prep. And now that I've done it, I'm going to walk you through how to run that kind of masquerade for yourself. A couple of caveats to get out of the way. I run this game online using Foundry Virtual Tabletop, and some of my advice will be tailored to that medium. I'll also discuss how I'd handle things in person when I can. Because I'm running online, I use a lot of art, and while I do my best to only use art that the artists have explicitly okayed being used in this way, I am an imperfect being and I may make mistakes. If you see some of your art in this video and would prefer it to not be in here, please contact me and I will blur it or otherwise remove it. You'll find a link in the description to all of the sources that I could find. I also use Miro.com as my GM board and campaign repository, and I will reference it throughout the video, but I'll try to make my organizational tips as broad as possible. I also want to emphasize that this kind of event is only possible if you're in a long-term campaign with established social politics among a broad array of NPCs. This wouldn't work at all for a one-shot, or early on in a campaign when the players don't know who anyone is. Just as crucially, I have amazing players who are deeply invested in these NPCs and have spent 2 years of real time building relationships with them. It may seem kind of obvious, but if you don't have players who enjoy that kind of roleplay, it doesn't matter how good of a game master you are. You just won't have a good time running this. So let's start by establishing the conditions of this masquerade. First, the attendees are all known to the players. They are either people they've interacted with directly or nobles like the queen who they have seen and can identify. Second, the goal of the masquerade is to correctly identify as many of the other guests as possible. The other guests are competing as well, so it behooves the players to hide their own identities too. Finally, the masquerade itself will take place over 2 sessions. That gives the players lots of time to roleplay with the other attendees, as well as for the masquerade's internal events to occur. The build-up to the masquerade took place on and off over several sessions, with the PCs choosing their outfits, finding dates, and doing investigative work. Courts of the Shadow Fae, like I said, provides 126 NPCs for me to play with, ranked by their status at court, ranging from servants all the way up to the queen herself. Choosing who would attend was pretty straightforward, like the queen and her son the Black Prince, and the rest were chosen based on their status at the court or their importance to the PCs. I ended up with the weird number of 33 NPCs in attendance, and in retrospect, I could probably have trimmed it down without losing too much. Thanks to their advanced work, the party knew 5 of the guests' identities, leaving 28 for them to uncover. The party also managed to see the guest list before the masquerade, so they knew who would and would not be there, making their lives significantly easier. The next step was to give the NPCs their costumes. I've known this masquerade was coming for over a year, and during that time I collected a Pinterest board of masquerade costume art. With 33 NPCs to manage, I wanted to break them up into 4 rough categories: animals, nobles, heroes and villains, and food. I say rough because, as you'll see, the food category really did me in. Ideally, you want the masquerade art to fit the vibe of the NPC's art, but when this is what you're working with, you gotta be a little flexible. Our game has a lot of space for levity, so a few goofy images weren't a deal breaker for me, but if you're trying to run something more tonally serious, maybe spend more time than I did finding art that both matches the theme and looks dignified. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why go through all this trouble with art in the first place? The simple answer is I couldn't think of another way to do it, especially given that I run this online. Even if I were running this in person, I still think I would find pictures and print handouts of the NPCs for the players. This is a complex encounter with a ton of moving pieces. You're asking the players to recall interactions they've had over the course of, in my case, 2 years in real time. and to use that information to identify someone who's playing hard to get. ADHD is an executive function disorder, meaning that things like your working memory are compromised. It's just harder for us to hold multiple thoughts in our head at the same time. And since my players are also varying degrees of neurodivergent, I wanted to make this as easy on all of us as possible. Also, in the case of my game specifically, all NPCs are interactable tokens within the world, and their Masquerade counterparts needed to be the same. And that meant finding new art for each of the guests. That said, I've thought about this a lot, and if you're a GM who would run this theater of the mind, then maybe tell me how you'd make it work in the comments. As it is, we need tokens for NPCs and art for those tokens. Once you've selected your art, match it to the NPCs and then sort them into their respective categories. The idea behind these groups, apart from making our lives a little easier, is that each group will perform a spectacle at the masquerade. The party members can participate based on which group they're in, with the final aim of impressing the queen, whoever she's disguised as. I came up with rough ideas for what each spectacle would be, what order they would go in, and who would win, assuming no player involvement. I knew my players would get themselves involved, so I didn't put too much energy into this, just enough that I know how things would go if left to their own devices. I also knew what the PC's costumes were, so I knew going in which group they'd be working with. Of the 3 players, one was in the animal group, one was in the noble group, and one was disguised as a servant for reasons too complicated to get into. So I came up with more complete ideas for the food and the heroes villains groups and followed the leads of the players in the other groups. That leaves me with a rough schedule of the main events. The queen leads all the guests on the wild hunt to the hunting lodge. The guests prepare for their spectacles. The first spectacle is the animals, doing a procession of the seasons. The second spectacle is food, creating an Archimbolo-style food painting of the queen. The third spectacle is heroes and villains, who are doing an Ember Island Players-style retelling of a past deed of the parties. And the final spectacle, the nobles, performing an elaborate fashion show on the walls and ceiling. Afterwards, the guests submit their guesses at each other's identities. The Black Prince reveals the winners of the identity contest. The Queen judges the performances, and the party comes to an end. This is what Alexandrian calls the main event sequence. I'll link his excellent blog post on party planning in the description. I have a couple of random events on my Miro board that I can sprinkle in if and when it feels right. For example, an NPC who's written a love poem to another NPC and is looking for the right moment to say it. Normally, I'd use 3 or 4 random events for an encounter of this size, but with this event specifically, I really wanted to give the players lots and lots of time to interact with the NPCs. My players are very self-directed and don't need a lot of hand-holding to engage, so I mostly left the space between the events open for as much roleplay as possible. The next step for me was to translate this into Foundry. I found this great map from user Mullica on Reddit, which is apparently for a masquerade in Ravenloft, and I adjusted the colors so it looked like it belonged in the Shadow Realm. With my scene created, I began creating tokens for each of the masquerade guests. Please note, if you are using Foundry, you may encounter an issue where 2 actors that share the same name will sometimes spontaneously switch their art. This would have been devastating to my game if I hadn't caught it in time. As you're creating actors for each guest, name them Moongallow 2 instead of just Moongallow, and you should avoid that problem. In the token settings, you can also set the display name to display only when you hover over it, which will help you a lot during the session without spoiling anything for the players. I also gave each group a unique token frame to help me and the players keep track of who was in which group as we were running it. Once I had actors created for each guest, I placed them around the map. I distributed them mostly randomly, although I tried to keep known couples together, as that could serve as a clue to the players. Throughout the event, I moved tokens more or less randomly from room to room, creating a sense of flow to the party. The map I used has a large dining area, but since I didn't have a sit-down meal planned, I turned it into a tapas-style buffet and found a roll table of magical foods with some fun, spicy effects that were mostly beneficial to the players, and allowed them to roll on it if they ate anything. I also, just for fun, used the mod Monk's Active Tile Triggers to place invisible tiles around the map that, when triggered by the players, prompted them to roll a perception check and rewarded high rolls with a magical item. I did this because, 1, it encouraged them to explore the entire map, and 2, it was fun. With the art and tokens prepared and a rough outline of story beats to hit, we come to the part that maybe could have used more attention in my game, prepping what the NPCs will say. With 33 NPCs to manage, this is a bit of work, and I won't lie to you, I skipped most of it. Like I said, we've been playing with these characters in this world for over 2 years now, and I've learned a lot about how to play them as the campaign has progressed. Seeing their picture is usually enough to trigger my memories of how the party has interacted with them. This is the low-effort way to prep that puts higher cognitive load on me as game master during the game. I made that trade-off consciously, and while I'd like to pretend I pulled it off flawlessly, the truth is I didn't. I did mess up at least twice. I was able to recover both times and it didn't negatively impact the game, but it was stressful and I could have avoided it with better prep. This way also only works because I know these characters inside and out. At any masquerade or event where you're not deeply familiar with every attendee, more prep would absolutely be necessary. So, what would that prep look like? If I were to do it again, I'd go on Miro and add sticky notes to each of the attendees with minor clues or tells or moments that reminded me of interactions they've had with the PCs. Lord Baladrin is flirty and loves playing games. Hawksblood is the flamboyant dance master. Songmesha the Raven-haired is coy with a deep southern accent, and so on. If I were a different GM, I'd already have a file for each NPC that extensively details the player's interactions with them, but I'm really good at retaining that information, with some help from my notes and recordings of the games, so I don't feel the need to write it twice. If I were running this in person, I would definitely go into more detail and make bullet points of key interactions on each NPC's sheet. Whether you run this online or in person, I'd urge you to put some effort into this part of your prep. I got away without it, but I might have done better with it, and you probably will too. With all these pieces in place, there's nothing left but to run it. On the practical side, my players have their own Miro board where they track NPCs they've met, which is a necessary form of group note-taking when you have 126 NPCs to keep track of. During the session, as they met a party guest, I posted a picture of their costume to Discord, and the players added it to their Miro board and posted notes with their guesses and any clues they picked up. This allowed them to track things in real time and share their insights with each other. The hardest part of running this was not saying the actual names of the NPCs. The players came up with cheeky descriptions of each costumes, like the melty face guy, the lady in red, the spider lady, and so on, and I needed to remember to say those names rather than the name of the NPC. I flubbed this twice, fortunately not in ways that completely upended the game, but it was embarrassing, and I'm honestly not sure how I could have done it better other than focusing harder. In retrospect, I should have written down each cheeky name they came up with and added a sticky note to my Miro board so I could reference it. I recommend you do something similar when you run it. And how did it go? It went brilliantly. The players were fully invested in figuring out who the NPCs were, so I didn't add too many side events to distract them. Just let them roleplay to their heart's content and kept to the story beats I laid out in my main event sequence. One notable event was the party member who was part of the Noble faction suggested that they do a murder mystery in the middle of their spectacle. It was a really cool idea, and they ended up winning the contest. As for the guessing, the two party members who participated came in second and third, only getting a couple of the guests wrong. They raised their status at the court, and soon they'll be ranked high enough for an audience with the Queen, so they're well on their way to winning the module. And I couldn't be more proud. All right, to wrap it all up, a masquerade built on known relationships is a very challenging but very rewarding encounter. I recommend making copious use of art, dividing the attendees into groups to make them more manageable, having a loose event sequence to guide you, using the tools of a virtual tabletop to your advantage if you're playing online, and most importantly, doing the legwork of developing meaningful social relationships between NPCs and PCs before you even attempt something of this scope. If you do the work, though, it can be an incredible experience, and if you're running a long-term campaign, I really recommend giving it a go. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. I do have an exciting announcement. My commissions are open if you're looking for a GM or you want someone who can body double with you. Go to ko-fi.com/astralmarmot/commissions if you're interested. There's a link in the description. And if you just want to support the channel financially, which I'd be very grateful if you did, you can go to ko-fi.com/astralmarmot and buy me a cup of tea there. Thanks again for watching. Go get yourself a glass of water, and may your masquerade be full of mystery, adventure, and excitement for your entire table. And unclench your jaw.